Resuming debate, the honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe you seek it. You'll find unanimous consent for me to split my time with the member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Agreed? Agreed. The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians expect their institutions to protect them from the malign threat activities of authoritarian states. Canadians expect the whole of the Government of Canada, including its intelligence agencies and law enforcement, to protect our elections and democratic institutions from the coercive, clandestine, and corrupt foreign interference threat activities of authoritarian states. That's what Canadians expect, and that's why Canadians were so shocked when the extent of foreign interference in our democracy was revealed to Parliament and to the public. Justice Hogue, who is leading the Foreign Interference Public Inquiry, concluded in the inquiry's initial report that, quote, interference occurred in the last 2 general elections, end quote, and became so serious that, quote, it diminished the ability of some voters to cast an informed vote, end quote. She also concluded that foreign interference had a negative impact on the broader electoral ecosystem in the 2019 and 2021 elections, and that it undermined public confidence in Canadian democracy.
The government dragged its heels in taking action on the advice of CSIS and other national security entities that had identified these threatening activities years ago, before both general elections that took place afterwards.
Warned in 2018 by the director of CSIS of the existential threat from foreign interference threat activities of the People's Republic of China here in Canada. National security agencies advised the government to introduce a range of measures to counter these threats, including legislation. It took years for the government to introduce Bill C-70, an act respecting countering foreign interference. But finally, it has been introduced. So let me outline our views on this bill. This bill is divided into 4 parts. Part 1 proposes amendments to the CSIS Act. These amendments are the most significant changes to the Act in decades. As my honourable colleague, the Minister, pointed out, the CSIS Act was introduced in 1984, just after disco, but before the introduction of the Internet, social media, smartphones, and so many other technologies. The amendments will allow CSIS to obtain preservation and production orders, as well as warrants to obtain information, records, or documents through a single attempt. They will allow CSIS to better collect, retain, and analyze data for intelligence purposes. They will allow CSIS to collect foreign intelligence for the first time and allow CSIS to disclose classified information outside of the government to provinces, municipalities, universities, and companies. Part 2 amends the Security of Information Act in the Criminal Code to create new foreign interference offences. The bill creates a new offence of up to life in prison for a person who commits any indictable offence under the Criminal Code or under any other act of Parliament at the direction of, or for the benefit of, or in association with a foreign entity. The bill would create new offences for a person to engage in clandestine activities at the direction of, or in the benefit of, or in association with a foreign entity that is prejudicial to the safety or interests of Canada, or to influence the exercise of a democratic right in Canada. Le projet de loi.
The bill makes it easier to prosecute foreign interference by eliminating the need for the Crown to demonstrate that harm to Canadian interests is the purpose of committing the foreign interference offence. If either the person committing the offence or the victim has a link to Canada.
2 amends the Criminal Code to broaden the offence of sabotage to include sabotage against essential infrastructure, which is defined as transportation, information and communication technology, water and wastewater, energy, utilities, healthcare, food supply, government operations, and financial infrastructure. Sabotage is defined as anyone who interferes with access to essential infrastructure or anyone who causes and essential infrastructure to be lost, inoperable, unsafe, or unfit to use, with the intent to endanger the safety, security, or defense of Canada, or the armed forces of an ally in Canada, or to cause serious risk to the health and safety of the public. And as the Minister pointed out earlier, Mr. Speaker, the Minister's views is that that essential infrastructure includes the construction of that essential infrastructure. The sabotage offence provided for in the bill provides an offence punishable up to 10 years in prison, and for greater certainty, Part 2 makes it clear that it exempts legal advocacy, protest, or dissent that does not intend to cause harm. Part 3 amends the Canada Evidence Act and makes consequential amendments to other acts to create a general scheme to deal with information related to foreign affairs, national defence, or national security in federal court proceedings, and proposes amendments that will permit the appointment of a special counsel to protect the interests of non-governmental parties in those proceedings. The fourth and final part of the bill, Mr. Speaker, establishes the Foreign Influence Transparency and Accountability Act, which creates a Foreign Influence Registry and a new Foreign Influence Transparency Commissioner. Any person under the direction of or in association with a foreign state or foreign government or any entity controlled by that state or government, and who communicates with a public office holder or who communicates or disseminates to the public about political or governmental processes, or who distributes money or items of value or provides a service or the use of a facility must register. The bill creates an indictable offence of up to 5 years in prison and up to $5 million in administrative monetary penalties for failing to register or for providing false or misleading information to the Commissioner or for obstructing the Commissioner's work. These are tough penalties for failing to register, and they will have a deterrence effect on those thinking about acting on behalf of a foreign state or a foreign controlled entity in a corrupt, coercive, and clandestine manner. For those who do act in such a manner, I expect they will not register, and these tools will make available to law enforcement and to other enforcement entities, such as the Commissioner, to hold these individuals accountable for their activities, either through the new administrative monetary penalties of up to $5 million, which have a much lower threshold for use, or through referral to the appropriate police of jurisdiction for criminal prosecution. The new Foreign Influence Transparency Commissioner would oversee a public registry containing information on individuals engaged in influence activities on behalf of a foreign principal. The Act provides for the Commissioner to provide reports to the Public Safety Minister and to Parliament. The Commissioner is appointed by Governor and Council, effectively by the Prime Minister, after consultations with the leaders of the House of Commons and Senate. But ultimately, the decision to appoint the Commissioner is a decision of the Prime Minister's alone. Mr. Speaker, in principle, we support this bill. Now that Bill C-70 has finally been introduced, the government and official opposition and other recognized parties in this House must work together to ensure that our democratic institutions and elections are protected from the threats of authoritarian states. Inaction and delay cannot continue. As Justice Hogue noted, the risks from the impacts of foreign interference will only increase as long as sufficient protective measures to guard against it are not taken. As our general election draws closer and as the life of this Parliament draws to an end, time is running out to strengthen the confidence Canadians have in our elections through legislation.
For this reason, Conservatives are proposing to work with the government and other parties in this House toward the expeditious passage of Bill C-70 through the House of Commons and in committee, allowing sufficient time to implement safeguards against foreign interference before the election.
Conservatives will work in good faith, Mr. Speaker, to ensure the rapid progress of Bill C-70 through the House while ensuring sufficient scrutiny of its provisions. We are willing to consider amendments to this bill, but we want this bill to pass. Mr. Speaker, the government has often asked the official opposition to work with them, and this is an instance in which we will.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's nice, and I'm actually encouraged to hear that the official opposition sees the merit to this bill. I think as a government, and the Minister has stated on many occasions, that foreign interference is something that we should all be concerned about, and we're far more effective if, in fact, we can act as one in many different ways. I understand that the member has not had the legislation itself for long, but my question to the member is, does he have any sense of any forms of amendments that he could see to the legislation, or as a whole, the principle of the legislation that he's quite prepared to see pass relatively quickly?
Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, I note that Part 4 of the bill provides for the creation of a commissioner. That commissioner is situated within the machinery of government, within the Department of Public Safety Canada. That commissioner is appointed at the advice of the Prime Minister. Perhaps an amendment that would strengthen the independence of that office would be to appoint the commissioner after the Prime Minister has consulted with leaders of the recognized parties in the House of Commons and in the Senate, and after resolutions have been adopted by both the House and the Senate. That perhaps is an amendment that would strengthen the independence of that office.
In comments, question commentaire, l'honorable député de Repentigny.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. And we know that it was very heartfelt because we know that he's been a victim of threats or interference. It was very interesting to hear from him, therefore. We can certainly improve this bill at committee. The Bloc Québécois tabled a bill to improve this legislation. For example, that the registry should consider universities, and that in addition, former public office holders could be forbidden from working for foreign agents for 3 years. What does my colleague think of these ideas? Does he think that this could help? The Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills. I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. I do think that there are measures in this bill that will give CSIS the powers it needs to communicate information, to communicate classified intelligence to universities, to municipalities, to provinces. To ensure that they have that information to protect their interests at the provincial, municipal, university levels. We support that measure in this legislation because we think it's very important to give these powers to our intelligence and security agencies.
Commentaire, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Canadian history is replete with examples where Canadians of different origins have had their loyalties questioned because of nothing more than their nationality. Italian Canadians, Hungarian Canadians, and of course the infamous example of the internment of Japanese Canadians who had their loyalties questioned simply because of where their heritage may have come from. And as my honourable colleague pointed out, Part 4 of this bill seeks to establish for the first time a registry of foreign influence. I know my honourable colleague is a strong proponent of free speech and making sure we have political freedom in this country. Does he think that Section 113, which defines the criteria upon which the need to register is set forth, strikes the appropriate balance to make sure that we are truly catching those who are working at the behest of or for their own benefit for a foreign state, as opposed to Canadians who are simply expressing their views that might or might not correspond with that of a different country?
A very quick answer, the Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Thank the colleague for the question. My father came here in 1952 from Hong Kong as a Chinese immigrant, only several years after the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed. And even though that legislation had been repealed, the sentiments that underpinned that legislation still remained in Canada. And so I think we have to be acutely sensitive to Diaspora communities, I note that this bill is agnostic when it comes to foreign states and foreign governments. It requires all persons to register, regardless of the foreign entity the foreign principal that they are acting on behalf of or in association with or at the direction of. So I think it is a fair bill that will ensure that there's greater sunlight and transparency, which I think is also an important tool to use to ensure that diaspora communities are not unfairly targeted. Because when information is made public, the bad actors are made known, and everyone else is understood to be innocent.
The honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Point of order?
Sure. Point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I believe if you seek it, I believe you will find unanimous consent for the following motion, which would see this bill voted on at third reading by the end of day, Wednesday, June 12th. That, notwithstanding any standing order, special order, or usual practice of the House, Bill C-70, an act respecting countering foreign interference, shall be disposed of as follows. A, at the expiry of the time provided for government orders later today, the bill would be deemed adopted at second reading and referred to the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. B, during the consideration of the bill by the committee, 1, the committee shall have the first priority for the use of House resources for committee meetings. 2, the committee shall meet for extended hours on Monday, June 3rd, Tuesday, June 4th, Wednesday, June 5th, and Thursday, June 6th, 2024, to gather evidence from witnesses. 3, the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions, and Intergovernmental Affairs, the officials from the RCMP and CSIS, the National Security Advisor, the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, the officials from the Department of Public Safety, and other expert witnesses deemed relevant by the committee be invited to appear. 4, all amendments be submitted to the clerk of the committee by 9 a.m. on Monday, June 10th. 5, amendments filed by independent members shall be deemed to have been proposed during the clause-by-clause consideration of this bill. 6, the committee shall meet at 3:30 p.m. on Monday, June 10th, 2024.
I'm hearing no or no's. So maybe it sounded good until I guess to that point. So I guess maybe the caucuses can go back and discuss maybe that program motion. On the same point of order, the honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was not what was agreed to, but I'm sure we'll be presenting something similar in the coming hours.
Wait for the House Leader for the official opposition. Voila, the honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to make it very clear that it was the NDP that said no to this very common sense motion to get this legislation passed.
The honourable member for Cowichan Malahat Langford.
Mr. Speaker, but we did have good faith conversations on this motion. We agreed up to a certain point. If the Conservatives want to reword it, they will find the NDP is going to be quite cooperative on this matter. I'd like to put that on the record.
I don't want to get too deeply into the discussion. The honourable House Leader.
We should probably take these discussions offline so we can find out why the NDP are opposed to having this bill passed by a certain date. That was the key. The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby. New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we have good faith negotiations behind the scenes, we don't engage in partisan jabs like that.
That's right. I would think let's continue discussions.